All right, let's jump right into this explainer by looking at a totally fascinating architectural mystery, one that's actually hiding right in plain sight inside some of the world's most famous buildings. Now, if you've ever walked into a massive, historic church, you've probably been completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all, right? You look up, you take that obligatory neck-craning selfie with the rose windows, and you just feel incredibly small. But what if I told you that the absolutely most important, defining feature of that entire breathtaking space is something you probably walked right past without even noticing?
So it really begs the question, what actually makes a cathedral, well, a cathedral? You naturally assume it's the towering stained glass, the sweeping stone vaults, the flying buttresses, or maybe just the fact that it's a massive, crazy expensive building. I mean, people use the word cathedral all the time just to describe a really, really big church. But the true answer? It's actually firmly planted right there on the ground. And believe it or not, it has absolutely nothing to do with architecture, size, or budget.
Think about this contrast for a second. We naturally think of a cathedral as this giant, beautiful church building. But the actual true definition? It's simply a church that houses a very specific chair. That's it. That immense size and breathtaking beauty, they literally don't matter at all without that one physical object. You can have a super modest, modern brick building in the suburbs, and if it contains this specific piece of furniture, boom, it is officially a cathedral. On the flip side, you could have a soaring Gothic masterpiece, and without this object, it's really just a very pretty, very large parish church.
To get why this is, we got to look at the word itself. Cathedra comes straight from Latin, meaning chair or seat. Now, in our modern world, a chair is just, somewhere to sit when your legs get tired. But back in the ancient world, a chair wasn't just a piece of everyday furniture. Sitting down in a formal setting was this incredibly powerful symbol of authority. It meant you held a specific responsibility, and it gave you the explicit right to teach. It's actually a super ancient concept. Just think about how a judge presides from a bench, or how a university department head holds a chair. Same exact idea. So here is the absolute crucial point. A cathedral literally derives its entire name and identity from this single profound piece of furniture. Without the cathedra, a cathedral would simply be another church building. The whole building actually exists just to house the chair, not the other way around. It totally flips how we understand these massive architectural wonders. At their core, they're really just grand protective cases for a seat of teaching authority.
Moving on to the anatomy of the cathedra, where form absolutely follows function. Let's break down exactly what this chair looks like, because every single curve, platform, and carving is engineered with a highly specific spiritual purpose.
First up, the backrest. You'll usually notice that the backrest on these things is quite tall, rigid, and beautifully crafted. But actually, scratch that idea that it looks cozy. It is definitely not designed for physical comfort or to let the bishop just kick back and relax. Visually, it represents the heavy dignity of his teaching office. By standing straight and tall, it acts as this constant architectural reminder of his solemn responsibility to faithfully proclaim the gospel, without bending or yielding to changing times.
Next is the seat itself. This part represents the bishop's pastoral office. His role is the visible shepherd of the local church, which we call a diocese. It's from this very specific seat that the bishop acts as a spiritual father. When he sits there to preside over major liturgical celebrations, it's a lot like a father gathering his family around the dining table. He's gathering his spiritual family.
And you can't forget the armrests. Just like armrests physically keep you centered and secure in a chair, they perfectly mirror the bishop's duty to govern his flock with steady wisdom, justice, and charity. He serves as the anchor for the local church, providing a stable foundation so the community can grow without being constantly tossed around.
Now check out the placement. You'll almost always find the cathedra sitting up on a raised base or platform, usually with a few steps leading up to it. And no, this isn't to stroke the ego of the guy sitting there. By elevating the chair so it's clearly visible during the sacred liturgy, the church is deliberately elevating the office itself. It's a great reminder for the congregation, and honestly, for the bishop himself, that it's entirely about the sacred role he fulfills, not his personal prestige.
Finally, let's talk decorations. While the structural anatomy stays super consistent, the artistic flair is a whole different story. Cathedrals all over the world are decked out with carved crosses, specific diocesan coats of arms, and really localized biblical symbols or artwork. A cathedra in a 12th century French Gothic cathedral is going to look wildly different from one in a mid-century modern cathedral in the American Midwest. But even though the art reflects the local church's unique vibe and history, the core function of the chair remains completely unified worldwide. All right, let's dive into the rules of the seat. Specifically, exclusivity and placement, because we really need to understand this is definitely not a VIP lounge chair for special guests. The church has some very strict rules to protect what it symbolizes.
There is a super strict hierarchy at play here. The cathedra exists exclusively in the cathedral, and it's reserved solely for the diocesan bishop. A priest celebrating Mass in your local parish, he uses a chair, for sure, but it is distinctly an ordinary chair, not a cathedra. Even if a visiting bishop drops by the cathedral, he doesn't sit in the cathedral. It is strictly reserved for the chief shepherd with that specific diocese, unless he gives explicit permission.
And that exclusivity ties directly into its core functions. The cathedra is this highly visible sign of teaching authority, a massive symbol of apostolic succession, and a sign of unity between the bishop and the faithful. Placed right there in a prominent, dignified spot, totally separate from where priests and deacons sit, it acts as a constant visual anchor. It proves to everyone in the room that this local community is fully in communion with the universal church and the Pope.
Which brings us to this invisible thread, a 2,000-year legacy. Because this goes way beyond just being a carved piece of wood or stone. When you look at the cathedra, you aren't just looking at furniture. You are looking at a 2,000-year legacy made totally tangible. It's literally an invisible thread stretching all the way back to antiquity.
It all comes down to a sequential chain of authority. When a bishop sits in that chair to teach, celebrate the liturgy, and shepherd his people, he is absolutely not acting on his own independent authority. He's exercising a ministry handed down sequentially. It starts with Christ, who passed it to the apostles, who then laid hands on their successors, right down through the centuries, man to man, directly to the specific diocesan bishop sitting in that chair today. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
Because of that unbroken chain, we get this really beautiful insight. The cathedra, therefore, points beyond the bishop to Christ, the Good Shepherd. The chair silently proclaims that Christ has not abandoned his church and that he continues to operate through these successors. It's fundamentally a symbol of faithful service and pastoral care, not earthly political power. It literally directs our eyes right past the human flaws of the guy in the seat, straight toward the divine foundation of the office.
And because this carries such an immense weight, the Church goes to extraordinary lengths to protect and define it. This isn't just some quaint tradition. From sacred scripture all the way to the catechism and canon law, the whole shebang, there's a massive foundation of texts ensuring we understand the gravity of this office. It's all there to encourage us to pray for our bishops and stay totally united in one faith.
Which wraps up our explainer for today. But I want to leave you with a thought. Before today, did you have any idea that the world's most breathtaking cathedrals were actually named after a piece of furniture? It completely changes how you experience these spaces, right? So next time you walk into one of these magnificent structures, absolutely look up at the stunning vaulted ceilings and the stained glass. But then, look forward, find the sanctuary, locate that cathedra, and take a second to recognize the invisible thread of history, continuity, and faith sitting right there in front of you. Will you be able to spot it?